Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Tales from the Crypt, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story begins with a man in prison who is about to be executed. Originally, he sought revenge on his boss, but mistakenly killed the secretary. According to the laws at the time, he was sentenced to death. Then, two burly prison guards dragged him to the execution chamber. Terrified, he wet himself, knowing he was to face the electric chair. A priest followed behind the guards, offering the man last rites. As they reached the chamber, the man was nearly collapsing, shouting that the governor would call to save him if only given more time. But no one heeded his cries. Everyone who entered that room claimed connections to the governor. The guards were desensitized to such pleas. The man, Niles, was in charge of the execution. Having sent off hundreds of prisoners to meet Satan, he believed those sentenced to death were beyond redemption. Unlike most American executioners who avoided eye contact with the condemned, fearing their ghosts, Niles had no such qualms. He not only executed but watched them die in agony. As the priest finished his prayer, Niles pulled the switch. A powerful electric current surged through the man's body. When the doctor checked and confirmed the man was still alive, Niles pulled the switch again. Niles relished the act of execution, finding an addictive thrill in sending criminals to their deaths. One day, while drinking, Niles saw a news report. Due to the cruelty of the death penalty, the government planned to abolish it. This was intolerable for Niles. Losing his job was minor. Not being able to execute prisoners was devastating. The warden dismissed Niles's concerns, and Niles was fired from the prison. Jobless and resentful, Niles spent his days attending court hearings. He saw criminals sent to jail and some escaping punishment through legal loopholes. One day, a biker gang member was acquitted of murder due to insufficient evidence. The biker celebrated, while the victim's family wept. This scene burned into Niles's mind. If the law couldn't punish such people, he would. The biker returned home, unsuspecting. As he reached for his door, a powerful electric current surged through him. It turns out Niles had electrified the door. The biker's death was ruled accidental. Niles felt immense satisfaction. He continued playing executioner in this way. Elsewhere, a couple evaded legal punishment through trickery, and as they celebrated by performing a hormone yoga session in their bathtub, Niles silently approached and executed them in their session. This, too, was ruled an accident. Niles began to see himself as a vigilante, punishing injustice wherever he saw it, unaware that he would get caught someday. Just as Niles was about to finish off a dancer, the police arrived and arrested him for murder. At that moment, the death penalty was reinstated in the United States. Niles was devastated, knowing he would now face the electric chair himself. Two prison guards forcibly dragged Niles into the execution chamber. This time, Niles had lost his previous arrogance. He repeated the same desperate plea as the man before him, claiming he knew the governor and just needed more time for a call that would save him. But no one heeded Niles's pleas. His former colleagues strapped him into the chair, and Niles was on the verge of tears. After the priest finished the last rites, the switch was pulled. The new executioner, much like Niles, enjoyed pulling the switch twice. Thus, Niles met his end in the very electric chair he once revered. And so, the story concludes. The second story begins on Christmas Eve, when a cozy atmosphere filled a household. The table was adorned with various cookies and gifts, and the festive spirit was palpable. A man sat on the sofa, engrossed in a magazine. Suddenly, a woman silently appeared behind him and struck him on the head with a fire poker. Hearing the noise, their young daughter ran downstairs, thinking Santa Claus had arrived. The woman quickly scooped her up, soothing her back to sleep. When the girl asked what her mother wanted for Christmas, the woman replied that she had already received her gift. Leaving her daughter's room, the woman called her lover, informing him that she had taken care of the problem and now everything belonged to them. She then returned to the living room to clean up the scene, wiping away the blood and preparing to drag her husband's body outside. Meanwhile, the TV broadcast a news report about a mentally ill individual who had brutally murdered 4 women in the area, warning residents to stay indoors. However, the woman was too focused on disposing of the body to pay attention. She planned to dump her husband's body into a well, but he suddenly regained consciousness and began to strangle her. However, he soon succumbed to his injuries and died. Just then, the woman heard a strange noise. She turned to see a figure dressed as Santa Claus. Without a word, the figure swung an axe at her. The woman dodged and ran back inside, grabbing the axe and injuring the intruder. The man fell into the yard, screaming in pain. Instinctively, she picked up the phone to call the police, but hesitated when she saw her husband's body. She hung up. The phone rang again. As she debated whether to answer, the intruder broke through the window and grabbed her sexy body by the neck. She struggled, smashing him with the axe, knocking him out. The phone rang again. The police informed her that an officer was on the way to search for the escaped mental patient. Realizing the police would arrive in 20 minutes, she tried to stay calm. After hanging up, she devised a plan to frame the intruder for her husband's death. She went outside to stage the scene, but a gust of wind slammed the door shut and the key fell into the cellar. She had to retrieve the key from her husband's body, finally getting back inside. She quickly called the police again, screaming that the killer was there and had murdered her husband, and she had just knocked the murderer out. Glancing out into the yard, she realized that her husband's body had been moved. Instantly, she knew the killer had regained consciousness. After hanging up the phone, she remembered that her husband's gun was in the wardrobe. She rushed to get it, but unfortunately, the wardrobe door jammed at that moment. Through the window, she saw the killer setting up a ladder and climbing towards the upstairs window, her daughter's room. She shouted her daughter's name and began to frantically bang on the wardrobe door. The noise woke the little girl, who saw someone dressed as Santa Claus climbing up. Excited, she opened the window to greet him. The woman finally managed to open the wardrobe door and ran upstairs only to find the room empty. She went back downstairs and saw her daughter safe and sound. She let out a sigh of relief, but the next moment her daughter gleefully introduced Santa Claus to her. The woman screamed in despair. The third story begins with a man who wanted to die multiple times and made it his profession. The circus owner was promoting tonight's special performance, a dual show featuring a death tragedy and a resurrection miracle. The actor, Ulrich, would be sealed in a coffin and buried 6 feet underground, but at the stroke of midnight, he would come back to life. Inside the coffin, Ulrich recounted his story. He was once a homeless drunk until a doctor approached him with an offer to make him rich in exchange for participating in an experiment. Ulrich, eager for money, agreed to his offer. The doctor, a scientist researching immortality, had made a breakthrough. He told Ulrich that a minor surgery could grant him 9 lives. Before Ulrich could fully grasp the situation, the doctor eagerly began the experiment, transplanting a cat's gland into Ulrich. To test the success, the doctor shot Ulrich dead. Moments later, Ulrich revived with a scream. It seemed the experiment had worked. Ulrich now had 8 lives left. The doctor warned Ulrich to value his remaining lives as they were precious. But Ulrich had his own plans. They approached a circus owner proposing a unique escape act. The owner, struggling with business, agreed to give them a chance. Their first show involved Ulrich being locked in a water-filled tank. As the water level rose, the audience grew tense. Ulrich soon lost consciousness. An hour later, the water was drained, but Ulrich remained motionless. Disappointed, the audience began to leave, feeling deceived. Then, Ulrich suddenly revived, looking as refreshed as if he had just taken a nap. The audience, stunned by the miraculous scene, returned to the theater. From that moment, Ulrich's death show became a sensation, and he became a star. As his fame and fortune grew, Ulrich became increasingly dissatisfied with the profit-sharing arrangement with the doctor. Believing he deserved more, he staged a car accident, using his ability to cheat death and escape legal consequences. To amass more wealth, Ulrich performed increasingly dangerous stunts, like dying by electrocution and being shot with crossbows. His popularity soared, and so did his earnings. Ulrich started living with a performer. One day, seeing Ulrich stash $60,000 in a safe, she was overcome with greed. She killed Ulrich with a knife and took all the money. After reviving, Ulrich demanded all the profits from the circus owner, threatening to cancel his shows if his terms weren't met. The owner, having no choice, agreed. Back in the present, Ulrich was buried in a coffin for his latest show. Inside, he smugly dreamed of his fortune until he remembered something. The cat whose gland he had received had already died once, meaning it had only 8 lives, not 9. Counting the tests and his performances, he realized he was down to his last life. Panicked, he pounded on the coffin, shouting that he wouldn't revive again, hoping someone would hear his cries. But the workers burying him dismissed the noise as a cat's meow and paid no attention. This time, Ulrich would experience true death. The fourth story begins with Sylvia as a call girl who took great pride in her sexy appearance. Unlike her peers, she had no agent and worked solo, dreaming of finding a wealthy man to elevate her to high society. One night, she lured a pimp into an alley, intending to rob him. In the ensuing struggle, she accidentally killed him. Sylvia was indeed ruthless. Instead of panicking, she immediately went to a pawn shop to turn the stolen jewelry into cash. Seeing Sylvia's demeanor, the shop owner grew suspicious of the jewelry's origins. Sylvia spun a tale, claiming the items were left to her by a friend who had an accident. She noticed that the shop was filled with various witchcraft items. While they were talking, a veiled woman burst in, accusing the shop owner of stealing her belongings and wreaking havoc before leaving in a daze. Sylvia, used to the chaos of street life, was unfazed and focused on the value of her jewelry. The shop owner, however, declared them worthless fakes. As Sylvia angrily prepared to leave, the owner stopped her, suggesting that she possessed something far more valuable than the jewelry. It's her beauty. He offered her $10,000 if she agreed to a small condition. The shop owner wanted to make a facial mold, allowing her to use her beauty as collateral with a 4-month redemption period. As the scene shifted, a display case filled with facial molds came into view. After Sylvia left, the shop owner lit candles and began chanting, seemingly performing a ritual. He then approached a coffin, speaking to it tenderly, promising that soon his beloved would be as beautiful as before. Shockingly, inside the coffin lay a horrifying, mummified corpse. With the money, Sylvia transformed herself, dressing meticulously and adopting the demeanor of an upper-class lady. Her efforts paid off when she attended a high society ball and stunned everyone with her beauty. She knew how to captivate a man's heart, and soon had a wealthy blonde man completely smitten. 4 months later, Sylvia moved into a grand house, living the life of a wealthy woman. One day, she noticed her skin suddenly becoming loose, and she aged visibly within moments. Doctors couldn't explain her rapid aging. Sylvia remembered the eerie masks in the pawn shop and her deal with the owner. She rushed to the shop with all her savings, but the shop owner told her that the 4-month deadline had passed. It was now the 5th month, and there was nothing he could do. In a fit of rage, Sylvia threatened the owner with a gun. He lamented that it would now require $100,000 to restore her beauty. Desperate, Sylvia returned home, frantically searching for valuables. The blonde man came home and, not recognizing Sylvia, he assumed she was a burglar and prepared to call the police. However, Sylvia shot him dead as shit and hurried back to the pawn shop, only to find it locked. She broke in through the back door and discovered the lifelike corpse of the shop owner's wife. The pawn shop owner explained that his wife had once been beautiful and now needed other women's beauty to maintain her looks. Uninterested in his story, Sylvia just wanted to regain her beauty. Seeing her desperation and the scattered jewelry, the shop owner claimed he could fulfill her wish, but wasn't sure if she truly wanted that. He showed her a newspaper featuring an article about a playboy swindled and murdered by a beautiful woman, complete with their photos. At that moment, the shop owner's police friend arrived, discussing the connection between the recent prostitute robbery and the playboy's murder. The police had registered photos, and Sylvia would face a death sentence if caught. Hearing this, Sylvia silently picked up her face mold and left the shop. On the street, she encountered an old friend from her escort days who no longer recognized her. As the statue shattered on the ground, Sylvia silently wept like a giant baby. The 5th story begins with a newlywed couple who were all set to embark on their honeymoon. However, it was clear that the woman's aunt didn't approve of their union, particularly distrusting the man. She believed he was only marrying the woman for her wealth. The man countered, saying the aunt had been taking money from her niece for 20 years and should be content by now. With that, the couple happily set off on their journey. That night, they encountered a heavy storm, and worse, they got lost in the middle of nowhere. A fallen tree blocked their path, and the woman asked the man to get out and move it. While searching for a flashlight, he found a hidden gun in the car. He joked that it must be a wedding gift from the woman's aunt. Outside, the man spotted a large house not far away, but decided against seeking shelter there, opting instead to return the way they came. However, the car keys were missing. Upon asking his wife, she suggested he might have taken them when he got out. Frustrated by a series of misfortunes, the man lost his temper, banging on the seats and ignoring his wife's feelings. With no other choice, they headed to the house to seek shelter for the night. Despite their calls, no one answered the door. Exhausted and cold, the woman expressed her fear, only to be scolded by the man for being cowardly. When he was about to break in, the woman found the key on the ground. As they were about to enter, she hesitated, mumbling something. Impatiently, the man asked what was wrong now. The woman suggested that, traditionally, the man should carry her over the threshold on their wedding night. Perhaps to ease the tension, the man obliged. Inside, the house was old and dilapidated, but showed signs of former grandeur. Yet in the stormy, dark night, everything seemed eerie and foreboding. In the living room, the sight of an axe on the mantelpiece made the woman scream, but the man was unfazed, even joking that the axe was like a family portrait, making a pun on the English word for battle axe. He also took the opportunity to mock the woman's aunt. The woman noticed that the firewood and kindling in the fireplace appeared fresh, as if someone had prepared them. The man, however, didn't think much of it and lit the fire, suggesting they get comfortable and smelly since they were married now. The woman hesitated, saying she needed to get their things. Watching the man undress, she looked terrified, as if something dreadful was about to happen. While changing into her nightgown, the woman asked if the man truly loved her or if he married her for her money, bursting into tears. The man quickly embraced her, assuring her of his love. Overjoyed, the woman agreed to his advances. Yet, she suggested they find a bed. Upstairs, the man noticed the clock, which had mysteriously started ticking, showing it was 11:30 p.m., just half an hour from midnight. The woman said she had wound it up because the ticking comforted her. In the bedroom, they found the bed freshly made and candles set out. The woman asked the man to light them while she freshened up in the bathroom. When she returned, she looked utterly transformed, wearing heavy makeup and a seductive outfit. The man was mesmerized, and as they fell into their smelly hormone yoga session, the clock struck midnight. The woman then suggested they have a child. Before long, the man fell into a deep sleep, snoring like a pig. He was awakened by sounds outside the window. Looking out, he saw a man and a woman approaching the house, cheerfully talking about coming inside. Rushing downstairs, he discovered the couple in the living room. To his horror, the woman was actually his wife. Devastated, he lamented that she never loved him, while the clock still showed midnight. Suddenly, a realization hit him, and his expression turned maniacal. Muttering to himself, he claimed their marriage certificate was the only real thing, and all her wealth was rightfully his. As he watched the couple on the sofa, his wife repeated the same words she had said earlier, suggesting they have a child. She walked towards the fireplace, stating that love would fade with time, but she would find a way to keep it unchanged. She then raised the axe and brought it down. Seeing this, the man tried to intervene but passed right through her, realizing she wasn't his wife, but a ghost. The woman's words clarified everything, suggesting that the woman was his wife's mother, and he was witnessing the night she conceived her daughter. Surrounded by the room's terrifying bloodshed, the man screamed like a pig being slaughtered, praying to God that this was all just a nightmare. In the next moment, the man woke up screaming in bed, telling his wife he had just had a horribly vivid nightmare. In his dream, his wife's mother had murdered her father on their wedding night. To his shock, his wife calmly replied that this was indeed what happened on the night she was conceived by her mother. The man, stunned, thought he must have misunderstood her. Suddenly, the woman retrieved the axe that had originally been on the mantelpiece and began to approach him step by step. She declared that she too wanted a perfect love, just like her mother's. Panicking, the man tried to explain that he had never loved her and had married her solely for her money. To prove his point, he grabbed the handgun from the bedside table, claiming he had intended to kill her with it. The woman, undeterred, insisted that the reason he hadn't killed her earlier was because he had already fallen in love with her and couldn't bring himself to do it. Determined, the man pulled the trigger, but no bullet was fired. It turned out that the woman had removed all the bullets while he was asleep. Realizing this, the man was plunged into despair. The woman raised the axe and brought it down, ensuring that the man met the same fate as her father. The scene then shifted. The woman returned home and told her aunt that her wedding night had been perfect and that she was already pregnant. She was certain that the baby would be a lovely girl who would also need a man when she grew up. The sixth story begins on a rainy night when a woman was preparing a retirement party for her husband. Upon hearing a noise outside, she assumed her husband had returned. Opening the door, she found a stray cat instead. Kindly, she brought the cat inside. When she turned back to the door, she found her husband, Jonas, standing there soaked, carrying his tools from work. Seeing her husband, the woman intended to surprise him. However, Jonas was distracted and slipped on the wet floor, dropping everything he was carrying. Already frustrated from being forced into retirement, this unexpected mishap made him shout in anger. The woman helped him up, gently comforting him using words first and muscles later. As they cleaned up, a hammer triggered memories for both of them. To her, it still shone beautifully, but to Jonas, it symbolized his 47 years of diligent work, only to be pushed aside at 65. His wife reassured him that his colleagues would surely miss him and that he now had plenty of time to himself. She led him to the table, eager to share the surprise she'd been preparing all day. Just as Jonas's mood was improving, he accidentally sat on a toy hedgehog, pricking himself. His wife quickly explained that her cats wouldn't do such a thing. They were always well behaved. Irritated, Jonas demanded that she get rid of the stray cat she had just taken in, insisting that from now on, he'd be home to keep her company around the clock. He then stomped upstairs to bed. Resigned, the woman opened the kitchen door to reveal a large group of various stray cats and dogs she had been secretly taking care of. Clearly, she had a big heart and had been sheltering many homeless animals. The next morning, Jonas woke up at 8:30 a.m., habitually thinking he was late for work and blaming his wife for not waking him. She laughed her hair off, reminding him that he could now sleep like a pig as long as he wanted. She left the room, cradling her beloved cat. Jonas thought that perhaps retirement wasn't so bad after all. He could sleep in every day. However, lying back down, he realized that decades of work had ingrained an early rising habit in him. The elderly couple started their new day with some bumps along the way. Watching his wife cook a delicious steak made Jonas feel great. He remarked it was his first free Sunday since he was 17. But just as he prepared to enjoy his breakfast, his wife served the steak to the dogs, leaving him with oatmeal and milk. Puzzled, he complained that after a lifetime of hard work, he deserved better treatment than the animals. His wife insisted that these animals were her everything, which infuriated Jonas. In his anger, he chased away a crow that had perched on the window, ready to eat. Though upset, his wife didn't dare to argue. After dinner, Jonas headed to the basement, reminiscing about the good old days. His friend came over to visit, bringing a model airplane to cheer him up. However, Jonas wasn't interested. All he wanted now was to trim the foliage in his yard. He quipped that he didn't want to become an old man who merely waves at cars passing by. While chatting, Jonas complained that his wife spent all her energy on those animals. He believed she needed to see a psychologist. The more he talked, the angrier he got, and he ended up butchering the plants with his large shears. At lunch, Jonas grumbled about the taste of the sandwiches his wife made. Looking into the can, he realized she had used cat food. His wife quickly apologized, saying she hadn't noticed. Seeing her genuine remorse, Jonas decided to let it go. But the tense atmosphere returned when a dog, named after him, barged in to flex its bad temper. That evening, while watching TV, Jonas kept coughing loudly. His wife suggested he see a doctor, but Jonas, feeling down, blamed it on the animals. His wife kindly brought him milk and snacks from the kitchen. After one bite, Jonas felt something was off. His wife explained she had added aspirin to the chocolate. Furious, Jonas yelled that he was a human, not a pet. Jonas's friend visited again, suggesting Jonas slow down and take life easier. Stubbornly, Jonas insisted he wouldn't just go with the flow. He also mentioned his wife giving him medicine the previous day. The friend suggested that his wife was simply not used to having him home all day and that they should have a heart-to-heart talk. Taking his friend's advice, Jonas decided to talk to his wife, only to find her talking to the cats. While trimming the plants, a kitten came over and annoyed Jonas, leading to a chase that left him covered in mud. When he went to the bathroom to clean up, he found the tub filled with his wife's fish. That was the last straw. He retreated to the basement to work on his plan. His wife had been complaining about the missing dog named after Jonas. When she asked him about it in the basement, Jonas seemed in good spirits and suggested she check the yard. To her horror, she found the dog had been turned into a taxidermy specimen. Jonas appeared, announcing that he had found a new hobby in taxidermy. His wife, distraught, demanded to know why he did it, explaining that these animals were like children to her. Smiling silently, Jonas led her to the basement to show off his collection. It turns out all the missing animals had been turned into specimens. Desperate, his wife pleaded with him not to harm the last remaining kitten. Ignoring her, Jonas began preparing for another taxidermy project. Realizing pleas wouldn't work, his wife grabbed a hammer and struck him. The scene shifted to the living room, where his wife sat on the sofa, happily chatting away. She mentioned how wonderful it was to have a man around to take care of things. Just then, the friend visited again to check on the couple. The woman cheerfully told him that they had been getting along very well lately and that Jonas had finally learned to slow down. As she stepped aside, she revealed Jonas's taxidermied body sitting on the sofa. The seventh story begins with a vain girl, Kathy, visiting a fortune teller to learn about her future, specifically her financial prospects. The fortune teller deduced that Kathy was a secretary whose daily job involved typing. Due to her persistent bad luck, she continued to work this mundane job, hoping one day to meet her soulmate or come into money. The fortune teller then predicted that Kathy would lose her job today. Kathy retorted that her boss was out of town and there was no reason she would be fired, at least not today. It seemed the fortune teller had made a mistake. Seeing Kathy's doubt, the fortune teller added that by the end of the day, she would have a new job. Kathy, skeptical, paid and left. Back at the office, Kathy told her friend that the fortune teller was a fraud, claiming she would be fired today even though her boss was out of town. Just as she finished speaking, her boss's voice came from behind her, and she was promptly fired. Before she even got home, Kathy found a job as a waitress, making her start to believe the fortune teller's words. Seeking further guidance, she returned to the fortune teller. The fortune teller told her that a large sum of money would soon enter her life and that she would get married soon. However, her future husband wouldn't be wealthy at the time of their marriage. Kathy declared she wouldn't marry anyone without money. She wanted a man with a yacht, a mansion, diamond rings, and fur coats. The fortune teller advised her to be patient. Shortly after the wedding, her husband would inherit a substantial fortune, after which he would die suddenly. The fortune teller predicted she would meet her destined love tonight, a bald man who would approach her and flex his bald head. At the bar, Kathy complained about the meager tips. A greasy man carrying a shining bald head caught her eye. Though attractive, Kathy felt uneasy as he approached her. She hurried back to the fortune teller for confirmation, who assured her he was the one. Kathy then sought her friend's advice, who also urged her to marry the man, noting their time together wouldn't be long. They whimsically imagined various ways the man could die, being hit by a car or choking on food. Deciding to take a chance, Kathy returned to the bar. The bald man approached her again to flex his greasy bald head, and this time, Kathy agreed to go on a greasy date with him. They went to movies, dined together, and danced in a TikTok style. Within days, the man proposed. Kathy didn't immediately accept. Instead, she asked if he had any wealthy relatives. The man mentioned his uncle owned a factory worth a lot of money. Hearing this, Kathy readily agreed to marry him not for his bald head, but for his money. Life after marriage didn't turn out as Kathy had hoped. Her husband was lazy and expected Kathy to handle all the household chores, but the thought of substantial inheritance kept her going. One evening, Kathy asked her husband about his uncle's whereabouts. He told her that his uncle had moved away with his family. Discovering that her wealthy relative had a family, Kathy was deeply disappointed. Furious, she ran to the fortune teller to complain about wasting 3 months on a penniless man. She declared she wouldn't be so foolish again and stormed out. After Kathy left, the fortune teller calmly remarked that Kathy would soon inherit a fortune and her husband would die shortly thereafter. She never made mistakes. Feeling down, Kathy went to the supermarket. Suddenly, the store owner appeared with a group of reporters, congratulating her on being the millionth customer, awarding her a $1 million check. Returning home, Kathy began packing her bags, ready to leave her husband. Despite his desperate pleas, Kathy harshly rebuffed him, wounding his pride deeply. In a fit of rage, he blocked the door with a knife, saying he couldn't have him, no one else would. He then killed Kathy. Afterward, he was sentenced to death for murder. The fortune teller watched the news report from her sofa, quietly asserting that her predictions were never wrong. Just then, another girl arrived, seeking her services. Thus, the story concluded. Indeed, the fortune teller had foreseen that Kathy's husband would inherit a fortune and die soon after, but hadn't told Kathy that the inheritance would actually come from her. The 8th story begins with a wealthy businessman, Carlton, enjoying his retirement. Despite his age, he still had a youthful heart, and recently, he had fallen in love. One night, he sat by the fireplace, sleepless. His butler entered, kindly chiding him for staying up all night. Carlton laughed heartily, confusing the butler, who wondered what was going on with his master. Carlton announced he was in love, prompting the butler to suspect he'd forgotten his medication. Carlton admitted that his feelings seemed crazy but were real. He felt young and was yearning for a passionate romance. The girl he admired was cultured and unique, and most importantly, she was young. Hearing this, the butler's expression changed, politely asking if Carlton was sure she loved him for who he was and not for his money. Carlton reassured him, planning not to reveal his wealth to the girl. The butler agreed, thinking it was a great idea. With that, the two men, like mischievous boys, cheerfully pulled open all the curtains in the room. The two drove to the girl's house. The butler thought Carlton could dress more elegantly, but Carlton believed that his current appearance better hid his wealth. As usual, the girl praised the flowers Carlton had brought, and Carlton remarked that they were not half as beautiful as the girl. He expressed his desire to give her happiness, but the girl pretended not to understand and asked him what he meant. Carlton lied, saying he wasn't very rich, but if she married him, he would share everything with her. The girl declined without hesitation, saying Carlton was kind but reminded her too much of her grandfather whenever she saw him. Though disappointed, Carlton was not someone who gave up easily. In the car, the butler asked Carlton how things went. Staring at his aged reflection in the mirror, Carlton replied absent-mindedly that everything would be perfect. He then went to the hospital, where the doctor detailed a comprehensive plastic surgery plan that could make him look 20 years younger. However, Carlton insisted he wanted to look 30 years younger. The doctor, looking resigned, said he could only turn back the clock to that extent. Carlton felt the doctor didn't understand. He wanted a completely new face. The doctor said that was impossible, but Carlton claimed he knew someone who could do it. Hearing this, the doctor thought for a long time before turning around and telling him that arranging such treatment would be very expensive. Carlton replied that life was cheap, but youth was precious. On a rainy night, Carlton and the butler arrived at a castle. In the basement, the doctor explained that achieving Carlton's desired outcome would not be easy and would cost $1 million. Carlton asked how the doctor could ensure the surgery's success. The doctor said he had performed it before, but no one in the US believed him. They all thought he was a fraud. As he spoke, the doctor's expression became increasingly manic, claiming that one day he would be celebrated in history. He then added that the surgery itself only cost $100,000, while the remaining $900,000 was needed to buy a young person's face, as the organs had to come from a living donor. He introduced Hans, a young man who would give Carlton his face in exchange for Carlton's money, while Carlton would keep his own brain. With the decision made, the doctor performed the surgery that night. After the surgery, Carlton asked where Hans was. The doctor said he was resting nearby. Carlton was puzzled as to why they still needed the young man. The doctor gave a cryptic reply that he never knew what might happen. Leaving the castle, Carlton indeed looked younger. He hurried to find his favorite girl, but she seemed frightened by his stiff new face and rejected him again. His face looked strange, and his body was still frail and old. She refused to marry an old man. Carlton went back to the doctor demanding a completely new body. The doctor said it would cost $2 million. Driven by his desire for love, Carlton underwent the surgery. Post-surgery, he emerged as a different person, with a strong, muscular body. Carlton confidently thought that the girl would not refuse this time. However, the doctor, leaning on his shoulder, ominously said that if he needed anything, he knew where to find him. At the beach, the girl noticed that although Carlton had a youthful upper body, his legs were still old and frail. This troubled Carlton greatly. He was running out of money and could no longer afford his house, and even his butler was about to leave him. Carlton returned to the doctor, who told him that replacing his legs would cost $1 million each. Carlton asked if Hans would agree to another swap. The doctor was confident, noting that Hans was currently enjoying his newfound wealth and would likely agree to a final exchange. Although the $2 million was all Carlton had left, as the saying goes, love drives people mad. After the final swap, Carlton was transformed into a completely young and handsome man. Delighted with his reflection, Carlton was certain this time the girl would agree to marry him. He hurried to the girl's place, only to be told by a neighbor that she had moved. Following the address, Carlton found the girl in a luxurious apartment. Excitedly, he showed off his youthful body and proposed to her with a ring. However, the girl revealed that she was already married. She said Carlton was a good man, but she needed someone with better financial stability. She then introduced her husband, none other than Hans, the man who had traded his body for all of Carlton's wealth. To add insult to injury, the butler was now working for Hans. It was clear that Carlton had made a terrible mistake. The 9th story takes place in a casino bustling with activity. Reno, who hadn't been seen in a while, made an entrance. He seemed particularly interested in the no-limit betting table. The waitress informed him that Sam was the dealer there now. Hearing this, Reno felt a surge of annoyance. At the bar, the bartender warned him to be careful. Sam was now a well-known high roller and dominated the no-limit table. Reno shrugged it off, boasting that he had beaten Sam several times in Las Vegas. Realizing Reno wasn't an amateur, the bartender took him more seriously. As Reno watched Sam's relaxed demeanor, he couldn't resist approaching. Sam, full of bravado, bragged about his success and how being on top was lonely, dismissing Reno as a relic of the past while claiming he was now the strongest. Reno retorted by reminding Sam of the $10,000 he had previously lost to him. Not surprisingly, old rivals met again, and soon they were arguing. They decided to settle the score with a new bet, where the loser would have to leave town forever. Reno suggested they gamble with dice. He rolled first and got double sixes, but Sam matched his roll, resulting in a tie. Frustrated by the stalemate, Reno proposed a game of Russian roulette. Outside the casino, they retrieved a revolver from Sam's car. After Reno loaded the gun, he handed it to Sam. With a 5/6 chance of survival, Sam pulled the trigger and survived. For the second round, Reno complained that Sam's staring was distracting him, but he also survived. In the third round, with a 3/4 chance of survival, Sam narrowly escaped death. In the fourth round, with a 2/3 chance, Reno also survived. By the fifth round, the odds were down to 1/2. Luck seemed to be on Sam's side as the gun didn't fire. Delighted, Sam believed Reno would either have to surrender or face certain death. True to his fearless nature, Reno, knowing the odds, pulled the trigger while uttering his last words. Miraculously, no bullet was fired. Instead of celebrating, Reno accused Sam of tampering with the gun, suspecting the bullets had become damp after 2 years in the car. Their argument escalated until they agreed to settle their score with a game of poker, a skill they both excelled in. They sat down at the table, facing each other, with the dealer ready to deal the cards. Each man had a doctor standing behind him. Sam proposed they skip using chips and wager their fingers instead. Loser of each round would lose a finger. Reno immediately agreed, boasting about his luck. In the first round, Reno won and allowed Sam to choose which finger to sacrifice. Sam removed his ring and offered his nose-picking finger. Reno swiftly cut it off. As the second round began, Reno taunted Sam, saying he'd never play cards the same way again. Sam held a flush, feeling confident, but luck wasn't on his side that night. Reno had an even better hand. Another nose-picking finger was lost. In the third round, Reno cautioned the dealer to be meticulous, not wanting Sam to mark the cards with his blood. Reno revealed a pair of 10s, but Sam had a pair of jacks. Furious, Reno threw away his cigarette and offered to return one of Sam's fingers in exchange for avoiding his own punishment. Sam, however, relished the chance for revenge and mockingly told Reno to say goodbye to his gloves before cutting off Reno's hormone-let-go finger. The scene shifted to a hospital where a nurse was mixing medication. Behind her, both Reno and Sam, now without arms or legs, continued their gambling, moving checkers with their noses. It was clear they were determined to settle their score to the bitter end. The 10th story begins with a group of people gathering for a mysterious ritual at night. In the process, a psyche threw a man's photograph into the flames. The scene transitioned to a doctor arriving at a party, warmly greeting guests before handing his partner Logan a freshly signed real estate agreement. They were planning to build a hotel on land whose previous owner had just died. Even the widow had passed away due to the two's collusion, delaying her treatment. Just then, a beautiful lady named Margaret caught Logan's eye. The doctor introduced her as an heiress from a noble London family. Logan asked for an introduction, but when he met Margaret, she was cold and constantly complaining about everything. Suddenly, a man burst into the party, urgently informing Logan that a worker had fallen into a swamp during construction. Logan, however, was unconcerned, instructing the crew to find another site the next day. The man warned that the entire area was swampland and quicksand, making it impossible to proceed. Realizing his hotel plans were doomed, Logan became despondent. He told the doctor he was on the brink of bankruptcy, as building on such land would cost millions, money he didn't have. Then, glancing at Margaret, Logan had an idea. To him, she was a walking bank. Determined, he decided to pursue her, but Margaret dismissed him as a crude young swindler. Her words didn't deter Logan. The following morning, Logan met with the psyche as shown earlier. They seemed well acquainted, hinting at a past relationship. Logan asked for her help, making Margaret fall in love with him. The psyche produced a vial of potion, explaining that 1 drop would make Margaret marry him, and 2 would bind her to him for life. Back at his place, Logan slyly added a drop of the potion to Margaret's drink while discussing the hotel plans. After drinking it, Margaret felt strange. Logan tried to capitalize on the moment, but Margaret slapped him, declaring she'd rather die than be with him. That night, while Logan was resting, Margaret unexpectedly arrived, and they spent the night performing a hormone yoga session together. The next morning, a servant brought them breakfast. Margaret expressed her dislike for the servant's appearance and wanted him dismissed, but Logan refused. Noticing Margaret wasn't entirely compliant, Logan decided to increase the potion's dose. He poured the remaining potion into the champagne. After drinking it, Margaret began to babble incoherently and writhe in pain. Logan called the doctor, hoping he could cure her, but the doctor couldn't find the cause. He asked if Margaret had consumed anything unusual. Suddenly, Margaret stood up, grabbed Logan, and declared her eternal love for him before collapsing lifelessly onto the bed. The doctor confirmed that Margaret was dead. Logan hurriedly went through the motions at the funeral. Frustrated, he confronted the psyche, demanding to know why she had caused Margaret's death. She calmly replied that she had only made the potion, but it was Logan who had administered it to Margaret. Realizing there was no point in arguing further, Logan vented his anger and left. After Logan departed, the psyche muttered to herself that this is going to be much worse than he thought. That night, Logan, under the influence of alcohol, visited Margaret's grave. Despite his grief, his primary concern was his business. Suddenly, Margaret crawled out of her grave. Terrified, Logan told her she was already dead, but Margaret seemed to have no memory of the events. She eagerly kissed Logan without using her tongue. The following morning, Margaret prepared a lavish breakfast. Logan noticed a foul smell in the house, but Margaret claimed she didn't smell anything. Concerned, Logan asked if she felt unwell, noting that her appearance seemed off. Margaret dismissed his worries, urging him to finish breakfast so they could continue their passionate activities. When the doctor saw Logan, he noted how refreshed he looked, assuming Logan was happy to inherit Margaret's estate. Logan told him that Margaret was not dead. The doctor firmly stated that it was impossible, as he had embalmed her body before the burial. Just then, Margaret appeared behind the doctor and decapitated him. Her face was already starting to decay. Horrified, Logan yelled for her to stay away, but Margaret seemed oblivious to her condition, focused solely on kissing Logan. He remembered the psyche's words and realized it was the potion's effect. Logan drew his revolver and shot Margaret, intending to send her to hell. As he wondered if it had killed her, Margaret stood up, complaining that he had ruined her new dress. Logan fled for his shitty life, with Margaret in hot pursuit, her body rapidly decaying. In his panic, Logan fell into quicksand, but Margaret pulled him out. Seizing the opportunity, Logan kicked her down, and a broken oil lamp set her clothes ablaze. He then used a stick to push her back into the quicksand. Believing Margaret was finally gone, Logan returned home, drinking heavily in celebration. Suddenly, the door burst open and Margaret, now a skeleton, returned, greeting Logan warmly. Unable to bear the shock, Logan crawled to the medicine cabinet and drank poison without hesitation. The voodoo ritual was underway again. Logan slowly regained consciousness, finding himself tied to a bed in the psyche's room. He asked her if he wasn't already dead. She replied that she had saved him and wouldn't let him die so easily. She added that someone was eagerly waiting to see him. Margaret then appeared, holding the doctor's talking head. The psyche reminded Logan of her promise that his love with Margaret would be eternal. As Margaret approached, Logan screamed in despair and in a chicken voice. The 11th story begins with a loser husband, Richard, sitting smoking in his hotel room, the lights off, quietly waiting in the dark. After a long 4-hour wait, his wife finally returned. Richard asked where she had been. She replied that she had been shopping and a friend had bought her a new coat. Richard, expressionless, remarked that she was supposed to be gone for only an hour or two, suggesting she seemed happier away from him. His wife tried to reassure him, reminding him that her friend was very close to Richard and had even been the best man at their wedding. Richard replied that people change and that they hadn't seen much of the friend since then. His wife urged him not to be angry, especially since it was their anniversary. Richard said he knew and had celebrated alone with a drink. Richard felt that the friend was mocking his success. Despite his wife's efforts to console him using her words only but not muscles, Richard couldn't shake his resentment until she suggested he rest. He confessed his fear of losing her, saying she was everything to him. Just as they were about to get intimate, the friend called. Richard asked his wife not to answer, but she did out of courtesy, chatting happily with the caller. Richard retreated to the bathroom, lost in thought. The scene shifted to a yacht where the three were together. Watching his wife and friend's overly familiar interactions made Richard uncomfortable. They arrived at a small island, and in the car, the friend joked about regretting not taking the woman away from Richard. The woman laughed, saying he was just being humorous. The friend admitted it might have been a dark joke, but Richard took it to heart, holding his wife tightly. Later, they arrived at their friend's vacation cabin, and Richard's wife couldn't stop praising the place. Her admiration only deepened Richard's feelings of inadequacy and sadness. That night, noises from outside woke Richard from his piggy sleep. He got up and looked into the living room where he saw his wife and their friend whispering to each other. He could faintly hear them discussing whether Richard had become suspicious. They mentioned that the old days were over and a new life was about to begin. Hearing this, Richard quietly returned to the bedroom and lay down, but he could no longer find any peace in his sleep. Early the next morning, Richard woke up to find his wife missing from their bed. He hurriedly searched the house but found no one. When he checked his wife's luggage, he discovered a set of lingerie, which he assumed was a gift from their friend. This assumption nearly drove him to the brink of a breakdown. Just then, the caretaker entered to light the fire. Richard asked where his wife and their friend had gone. The caretaker replied that he was instructed to stay and keep an eye on Richard. Just as Richard was about to lose his temper, his wife and the friend returned. They explained that they had gone for a walk in the woods after seeing Richard still asleep. Despite their explanation, Richard's mood did not improve. Drinking heavily, he began talking about his work and claimed that his wife was too embarrassed to tell their friend about it. The friend tried to reassure Richard, saying he shouldn't worry and that he could ask for help if needed. However, Richard, still angry, accused his wife of being materialistic and questioned if she had forgotten their wedding vows. Seeing Richard become hysterical, the wife ran off in distress, with the friend following to check on her, especially her sexy body. Alone in the room, Richard stared at the mounted trophies on the wall, a look of madness slowly creeping into his eyes. As night fell, the friend returned to see if Richard had calmed down. However, he found the living room empty. Heading upstairs, he saw Richard standing there, staring at him. Richard asked where his wife was. The friend replied that she was in the small cottage where she was staying. Richard then showed the friend the trophies mounted on the wall, now pierced with arrows. Richard said he was practicing and, turning back, pointed a crossbow at the friend. Though he claimed it was a joke, Richard advanced menacingly. The friend nervously backed down the stairs, but Richard fired without hesitation, saying he had a new trophy on his wall now. When the woman returned to the house, it was dark, with only the flickering fire illuminating the mounted animal heads on the wall. Hearing the door close behind her, she turned to see Richard, wearing her blood-stained coat. She asked where their friend was, and Richard replied that he had gone out for a walk, glancing towards the wall. Following his gaze, the woman saw their friend nailed to it and screamed in horror. She quickly ran to the bedroom, barricading the door with a cabinet. Outside, Richard's voice said he had a wedding anniversary gift for her. He picked up a pair of stockings he found in the wardrobe, saying he knew they were meant for the friend. He then broke down the door. Seeing her deranged husband, the woman jumped out the window in fear. Richard chased after her and strangled her with the stockings. He then dragged her body to the friend's cottage. As soon as he opened the door, the lights came on, and a group of people shouted congratulations. It turned out Richard's wife and friend had secretly planned a surprise anniversary party for Richard. Seeing him dragging his wife's lifeless body, everyone was stunned. After the twists and turns, Richard was filled with regret. The 12th story begins in a studio where the model Stacy was posing for photographs, with Devlin admiring her performance. At that moment, a man named Mitch walked in and approached Stacy, ignoring the interruption he caused. Stacy looked terrified. Devlin asked who he was. Mitch introduced himself as Stacy's manager and fiancé. Devlin remarked that Mitch must be proud of Stacy, but pointed out that his presence was making her nervous and asked him to wait outside. Mitch retorted that it was Devlin's flirty gaze that made Stacy uncomfortable, and he warned Devlin to be careful, as he wasn't someone to be trifled with. The sudden confrontation made everyone present feel awkward, and the photo shoot ended abruptly. Devlin told Stacy that she seemed to have an outstanding boyfriend. Stacy apologized, explaining that Mitch could be quite gentle at times, but had been in a bad mood recently. Devlin kindly offered Stacy a key to his studio, saying she could use it if she ever needed some quiet time alone. Stacy hesitated at first, but eventually accepted the key. Over the following days, Devlin and Stacy grew closer. One day, Devlin gifted Stacy a necklace, claiming it could grant any wish. Neither of them noticed Mitch secretly observing them from downstairs. The phone rang and Devlin answered, hearing Mitch's voice on the other end. He said Stacy was in trouble and not wanting to see him, so he had asked Devlin for help. He gave an address before hanging up. Devlin anxiously drove along a desolate road at night, frequently checking the map to ensure he was on the right path. He finally arrived at a cabin where a man was already waiting. Devlin got out and asked the man where Stacy was. Mitch replied that she was fine, then shot Devlin in the shoulder. Clearly, Mitch had bad intentions. Devlin fled into the dense forest, stumbling upon a freshly dug grave. Mitch caught up with him and reminded Devlin of the 10 Commandments, specifically the one about not coveting someone else's wife. Devlin retorted by pointing out the commandment against murder. Frustrated by Devlin's lack of cooperation, Mitch shot him dead and began filling in the grave. After finishing, Mitch lit a cigarette, feeling satisfied with his actions. After some time passed, Stacy was growing anxious because she couldn't get in touch with Devlin. Mitch showed up at her place, admitting he had been wrong and had done many foolish things. He hoped Stacy would take him back, especially since Devlin had disappeared when Stacy was in trouble. Stacy suggested that Devlin might have had an accident, which was why she wasn't answering her phone. Mitch laughed at her naivety and said that if it turned out Stacy was wrong, he hoped she could give him another chance. Stacy went to Devlin's place and listened to the answering machine's recordings. Realizing his crimes had been discovered, Mitch appeared and kidnapped Stacy. He took her to a cabin in the woods, saying that since she had uncovered the truth, he had no choice but to get rid of her. He told her not to expect Devlin to rescue her because he had already buried Devlin in the woods outside. Upon hearing that her lover had been killed, Stacy cried out in anguish. Meanwhile, Devlin, who had been buried, clawed her way out of the ground, severely decayed and emitting beast-like howls. Just as Mitch was about to assault Stacy, a noise from downstairs startled him. He picked up his gun to investigate but left the car keys on the table. When Mitch went downstairs, he found Devlin had returned. He ran to the car, intending to escape, only to realize the keys were still inside. Terrified, he screamed that he had already killed him before fleeing into the woods, inadvertently falling into the grave Devlin had just crawled out of. Devlin arrived and, with a shovel, severed Mitch's nose-picking fingers. He jumped into the grave and began frantically filling it with dirt. By this time, Stacy had freed herself and escaped the cabin. In the night, all that could be heard were Mitch's heart-wrenching screams echoing through the woods. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.